welcome to today's episode of This Organized Life podcast. I am your host, Rory, and I'm really excited to chat with today's guest. So joining me today is Amanda Cunningham, and I have yet to meet Amanda really and dive in. I mean, we met, of course, but we didn't really dive in, but I was introduced to her through a mutual friend. And what I loved about Amanda's story of what I heard was, like so many of our guests and so many people out here, they're faced with some adversity in some way, and they turn it into a solution, not just for themselves, but to help other people. And Amanda's story is no different. So she has 3 kids. She's married to her husband. They live in West Virginia. And her daughter, one of her daughters, and she's going to come in and tell the story, was born with Down syndrome. And I know that she was struggling to find an organizational tool to help her with all the things. And she's going to dive into it. And she couldn't find something that really met her needs. And so she did what any mom empowering doer does, is she created something, and something that not just worked for her, but she felt could help other people. And so now she's got an entire line of products, organizational tools to help parents with kids with special needs. I want to hear all about it. I want to hear how she came about it and what her life looks like. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Amanda Cunningham to the show.
Hi, what a great introduction. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Well, it's true. And when Lori sent your stuff over, she's like, I think I have a really good guest for you. And I was like, yes, I love her. I love this story. So I gave our listeners a real top line overview, a little bit about, but tell us a little bit about you, who you are, even kind of before this whole journey of yours started. And then we can kind of just walk us through to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So it's just a story of an unexpected circumstance kind of swooping in when you had no idea that it was going to happen, and flipping everything on its head in the best way after we got into it. So prior to having Aurora, I was a full-time corporate employee. I was in public relations for about 10 years. I had a 3-year-old son, my husband. We lived in West Virginia, both full-time working parents, and had a really solid routine. And we felt good about moving forward with having a second child. And we took that step in that direction and went 9 months and had all the plans made for how life was going to look after that. And went in on delivery day, and everything changed because Rory arrived with a birth diagnosis of Down syndrome. So, I had this whole routine in place of how I functioned, siloing your responsibility. Kid goes to school, you go to work, you have a little gap in between to get some things done without, little hands and feet needing things around you. And then all of a sudden I became a stay-at-home mom to a child with medical complexities and a busy 3-year-old. So it was an abrupt change to my life. And one I never thought was going to be a part of my story. I never saw myself as a stay-at-home mom. I loved my career. I loved being around people, and that just changed very quickly. So that's also a very quick overview of what happened.
Wow. Okay. So I'm sure I'm not the only one with questions. So I'm going to start asking some questions. And again, if I ask something that is off limits, just tell me and we'll go.
Ask away.
So first of all, we're in this day and age. I think the first question is, how are you? This is amazing in terms of the fact that you were blindsided by this. I mean, I remember I'm a mom of bigs, and I remember when my youngest, I was pregnant with her, and I had, well, at the time was a triple screen, and I guess now it's called a quad or whatever.
Yes.
Again, I'm dating myself. And there was some abnormalities, and I went for some follow-up tests and whatever. And that was back 18 years ago. So I guess my question is, how did this go under the radar for 9 months?
Well, I ask myself that every day still, and we're 4 years in. But the way that it played out was I was 28 at conception. I had already had a 3-year-old who was neurotypical. Everything went as it should have gone with his pregnancy and birth and development moving forward. We had no family history of anything, not that Down syndrome is hereditary in every case. Ours was not. So my doctor, when we came to that point in the conversation, he was like, do you want to do the test? I was like, does it matter? And he said, I don't think it does. You're 28. You have a healthy son. You have no family history. This is our second rodeo. So, I'm not worried about it. And I was like, okay, it was very casual. It wasn't something that I gave a lot of thought about. I kind of just took my doctor's lead and we moved forward. I had so many ultrasounds. At the time, my OB's office was going through a transition, and I had seen my OB one time, and then it was time to go in for my next appointment for that initial ultrasound. And I had been pretty sick, morning sickness, from my first appointment to this ultrasound. And I kept asking to see him again, to talk to him about morning sickness and how to handle it. And he was too busy. I kept seeing a PA. And we went into the ultrasound. Everything was fine. There was no concerns in the ultrasound, that initial one, and they couldn't get me in with my OB. So I made the decision that I wanted some more quality care. I wanted to be with my OB specifically. And so I transferred to a new doctor, an MD, and she had the practice of doing an ultrasound at every appointment after 21 weeks. So not only did I have that initial full anatomy scan at my previous doctor, that everything went by the wayside, I had another intake full anatomy scan at a larger hospital, to be intaked by this new OB. And then she did one in her office after 21 weeks, once a month when I go visit. The reason she did that is because a previous patient had fluid loss that went unnoticed because there wasn't an ultrasound, and they almost lost the baby. So she made that a common practice to check fluid levels, check growth, all of that. Nothing came up for Rory in all of these ultrasounds. Nothing came up for Rory in her first anatomy scan, which an anatomy scan isn't just to check the anatomy of the baby. It's to check all of the items, not just the gender, I should say. A lot of people think that anatomy scan is like, oh, a gender, we get to know the gender, but they're checking growth of the femur. They're checking the organs.
Sure.
Yeah, in great, no, please. And great detail. They're checking all these things. And so it's really mind-boggling that it went unnoticed. You know what I mean? Like, she had 2 small holes in her heart when she was born that was not picked up in our ultrasounds. There's just some markers that these children arrive with that alert you to the possibility of them having Down syndrome once they're born, but they can also be seen in ultrasound. And she just was sneaking by the whole time. I mean, she just wanted to make an entrance, and boy, did she made quite the entrance.
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. And thank you for that, because again, I feel like there's, especially with like prenatal care and testing, there's so many advancements, even since kids,
even since mine.
Yeah. And it's just, it's crazy. Cause again, it's not like you weren't getting prenatal care, like you were doing all the things. And I want to be very clear to people. Like, I'm sure it's not that it would have changed the outcome of her being in this world. It's just a matter of you not being so blindsided.
Prepared.
You could have been a little bit more prepared. I'm sure that's something that you've thought about over time. Go ahead.
That's a very big part of my story and my experience was her birth. And it's hard for people to understand unless they've walked it. There's trauma in this experience, in terms of you have an expectation of who your child is going to be. And naively, a parent of a neurotypical child, when their baby arrives, this baby fulfills that expectation. Oh, they're going to be a boy. They're going to have mom or dad's eyes. They're going to be athletic. They're going to grow up and be into literature. Like, you have all of these ideas of what your child's going to be. And with a neurotypical child, or, they don't have diversity in their physical ability, you have that story slowly unfold for you, that your child's going to be who they're going to be. They're going to grow into the person and their personality unique to them. And we kind of have this naive idea that we can create that before they arrive, as a young mother. And then when Rory came, I had this idea of who my daughter was going to be. And it wasn't a slow unraveling of that idea. It was a swoop. It was just every expectation for her life, every milestone for her life that I held in my heart for 29 years of what a daughter-mother relationship would be like. It was like the air was sucked out of the room as soon as that doctor said, this baby has Down syndrome. My first, and I know this is so cliche, but my first reaction was her wedding day. Like, that's the first thing that came to my mind after those words were said was, who will love her outside of her family? Like, who is she going to have a wedding day? And that was also a very naive thought, because as time has gone by and I've learned who Aurora is, and I've learned what's possible in the life of a person with Down syndrome, that's not something that's necessarily not going to happen. She very well could fall in love and have a life partner in some way as the years move forward. But in that moment, the social expectations that I had viewed for so many years about somebody's life with a disability or with an intellectual disability, that felt very out of reach. It felt taken immediately. And so I think the difference of having a prenatal diagnosis versus a birth diagnosis is the grief period that I went through the 6 months after she was born could have taken place in the 6 months prior to her arrival. And I could have educated myself a little bit better so that it didn't feel like it was all taken on the day she came, because her birth is now mixed with a sadness. It was like a duality of joy that my child is here, oh my gosh, I have a daughter, she's here, she's beautiful. And then immediately, all of those ideas of what that looked like taken away. So I have to hold that. I have to hold that for the rest of my life. And I think if I would have had a prenatal diagnosis, it would have been a soaking in that instead of just a bucket of water drenched all at once.
And first of all, thank you for being so transparent and honest about that, because I think a lot of people, for whatever their reasons are, whatever their personal circumstances are, have had feelings of sadness or like things aren't playing out the way I expected them to, or I want them to.
Yeah.
And it's true. And I think it's, I just come back to what people always say, all I really, boy, girl, all we want is a healthy baby. All we want is a healthy baby. And we say it and we mean it, but we say it so like cavalier, like just so cavalier, like just want a healthy baby, almost as like, well, that's going to be expected.
Yeah.
And here you are faced with, now she can have a wonderful full life, but at this point, you said she has 2 holes in her heart. So there's not only the fact that
the intellectual disability, physical
correct.
disability,
you're faced with this thing of like, I don't even know if I have a healthy baby.
Yeah.
So that's got to be very overwhelming. So those first few days, months, whatnot, kind of just walk us through a little bit about, you got the diagnosis.
Yeah.
And what was that like? I mean, I can't even imagine. Now, did she come home right away, or were you in the hospital?
we were in the hospital for a very brief period of time. We were in the hospital. Shockingly, she was very healthy when she arrived. She normally there's 12 markers and she only had, it was her eyes is what alerted them. She has these beautiful big almond eyes. And so, that's what brought attention to the pediatric nurse who was in there, who then called the MDs into the room. And she had the 2 small holes in her heart, but we didn't know that until we were transferred to a larger hospital. That's about 50% of babies born with Down syndrome have holes in their heart and have to have open heart surgery by the time they're 3 months old. Luckily, Rory's closed at 4 months on her own without intervention. And then after that 4 months, when her heart got healthy, her body started to thrive. So she was failure to thrive until the holes in her heart closed. So we just had to really monitor closely. And kind of isolate her from germs in the world and make sure that she was getting the nutrition that she needed so that she could grow. But once those holes closed, she was rather healthy. We didn't have too many health issues. So that 4 months was scary. There was a lot of extra appointments outside of just your normal doctor appointments, and then your genetics. We had to go to genetics after she was born. And then we had the cardiology also that we were checking in with to follow her heart's development. Not only that, I kind of went into like fixer mode, like as soon as we got her diagnosis. So like, not only was I like carrying grief and fear, but I also just, my pattern of coping is, overachieving, trying to get in there and clean up the mess as quickly as possible. And so in the doctor's office, I was like, I want early intervention because we have a state program called Birth to Three. They were in our house when she was 7 days old, and I enrolled her in all the things, and just came, buried in that for 2 years because I was, just so committed to getting her walking so she could enroll into public pre-K program when she turned 2. That was like something that I attached to for some reason. And so we had all of that, post-delivery stuff. I was discharged not even 24 hours after her delivery. We went to the new hospital. We got the heart diagnosis. They confirmed the Down syndrome diagnosis, sent us home, and 7 days later, we started early intervention. There would be up to 5 providers in my home a week, from PT to OT, child development, speech, a nutritionist because of the failure to thrive portion. And they would just rotate through my home Monday through Friday. And then my 3-year-old was in preschool at the time. So I'd take him to preschool and then do the interventions and then pick him up, and we'd have our normal evening is how it would look. So that's logistics. That's how it looked. Emotionally, it was the hardest thing I've ever walked through. Like, it felt like, I said, my life changed overnight. I went from having a career, thinking I was going to be on maternity leave, to putting my notice in, and quitting my job and becoming a stay-at-home mom. And it was like the world around me went back to life, and I was sitting in this new one because, your husband goes back to work. And after 3 weeks, he went back to work, and Owen went to school, and my mom and dad were living their life. And I was sitting there with the reality of, life, raising a child for the entirety of her life with a diagnosis after she was 7 days old, or 3 weeks old. So that was heavy. That emotional process was heavy.
And I'm sure I can't even imagine, and I don't want to turn this into a therapy session, but
No.
I can't, but it's like, there's got to be, and on top of the fear, there's just got to be resentment too. And in terms of like, this is not what I signed up for, right? Like, this is.
Yeah, that didn't really hit me. I would say that hit me later. What hit me at first was like this just shock and confusion. I was just very confused. How does it happen? Where does the fault lie? How did I not know? I carried so much shame and confusion around. Like, I had such a strong connection to Owen when I was pregnant with him. Like, I just had this intuitive feeling he was a boy, like 5 weeks in, I just felt like it. And Rory was very evasive to me intuitively for quite some time in my pregnancy. And I almost, I have religious belief. I almost feel like it was a decision between her and God if like she could stay or go. And that's why there was this evasiveness in the beginning. After about 5 months in, I started to feel really good about it, feel really good about her, about the fact that she was female, and then started those images of what life was going to look like. So I wouldn't say that there was really a wide, like an anger at that point. It was more of a confusion. The anger settled in later, and it was over, I view too, and everybody's different, how they look at their child with a diagnosis. I look at Rory, it's starting to blur a little bit more, but in the beginning there was Aurora and there was Down syndrome, and they were 2 separate entities. And Down syndrome was the thief that stole her life from her. I would say that was the feeling of anger that I had at that time. Now, as life is evolving and she's growing and Down syndrome is such a major part of her life, they're more like sisters than they are, somebody who's to be viewed negatively, and then her. So that continues to just kind of grow and evolve the more I learn about Down syndrome and about my daughter and what that all looks like.
Yeah. And at the time that if you guys are listening to this in kind of real time, we're about to enter October, which is National Down Syndrome Month, correct?
Awareness.
Awareness.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And again, this is something that you had no family history of. You didn't know anything about this.
No.
So I want to talk a little bit about how you came up with the Glory Days Planner. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Give us so you had these people coming in and out of your house. You had doctor's appointments, I'm sure, after doctor's appointments, not to mention, again, you just had your life, you have a life outside of that. In addition, you have a 3-year-old, which there's a lot of moving parts with that, and just life in general. So where did the idea come from? Oh, let me just start a business on top of this.
Yeah, really, let's add more to the plate. So what happened was, it was just a need that I had for myself. So I kind of got in, like I said, to that, that production mode. And I was sitting, how that happened, it was a grief response. So I put my notice in, I left my job, my career that I had been in, and here I was sitting at home, and I was supposed to be doing something while I was there. I was supposed to be supporting her and meeting the needs of this child who needed extra support. And because of my grief, I found myself sitting on the couch, after I'd get everybody out the door, I would sit there and hold her and contemplate all the things and not be doing the work. The therapists would come in and out. I would listen. I would participate while they're there. They would leave, and I'd go back into my grief hole, And one day I just had this feeling like, this is not working. Like, I got sick of myself. Does that make sense? Like, I was tired of being upset about what cards were dealt to us, and I was ready to take control of the direction we were going to go with it. And so in that day, I said, okay, what did you do in the past to manage your responsibilities and meet goals? When I had a career, I had a very busy career. I was in corporate communications and public affairs, and I was over waste management in that division for the state of West Virginia. So I had multiple sites that I'd have to travel to a lot. And so I had to silo my responsibilities and manage them effectively to meet the responsibilities of my job and then of my home life, because I had the child, previous to Rory and my husband. And I had a planner. That's how I managed it. I kept everything in this planner. I utilized it daily. I would mark off tasks to feel accomplished and to stay in the right direction. And so I was like, okay, you need the things, you need the planner, you need to go out and get on Team Rory and get all of the fun things that help you do that and make you feel good about it. Because I don't know about you, but having fun organizational tools kind of gets me pumped up for whatever season I'm in. If it's back to school and you get the new agenda, if it's a whiteboard to help you manage your house, whatever it is, that just always makes me feel like it's the team jersey you get when you join swim team in high school, So I went looking for an organizational tool to help me manage the responsibilities of raising a child with a disability and medical complexities. And there was nothing. I went to Pinterest, I went to Google, I went to Amazon, I walked Target, I went to Staples. There was absolutely nothing out there that was uniquely designed for the parenting journey I was walking. And what that means is that my daily pages had space for the ongoing appointments, and that it had space to track and implement the therapy that those providers were teaching me when they came into my home. Because 30 minutes once a week of speech or PT or OT, that is the educational piece. That's not what's going to move the needle. What moves the needle is the parent implementing it after the practitioner leaves. So I needed a chart of some kind to track this and motivate me to implement what they were teaching me. And I could not find anything. So I kind of just, gave up the search and was like, I'm just going to make a chart for myself. I had these big windows in my living room, these glass doors. I took a dry erase marker and I made the chart. So for instance, we had to do sit-ups on an exercise ball with her when she was an infant to help with core strength. And I would put 12 sit-ups 3 times a day for 15 minutes. And I'd put these little check boxes. And when I'd be sitting on the couch, going through that, oh my gosh, what does our life look like? What are we going to do? And I'd look up and I'd see those empty boxes. It took my mind from here to out here to doing, not thinking, to actually getting on the ground, putting the ball there, putting her on it, and doing the work. And then when my husband came home, I would be able to say, okay, this is what we did today. And there was a conversation outside of how we were feeling. We were talking about what we were doing. So I did that for the therapy tracking. And then I had a notebook that would just help me schedule out, our regular appointments and things of that nature. So that's kind of how it was born. I used that for 6 months. It was a very random epiphany moment when I realized other people would need it. I was just drying my hair one morning. My husband was making the bed, and it was just like this silence kind of took over my mind. And I heard, like, you need to make a planner. If you need it, other people do. And I really don't feel like it was my idea, truly, because I never had any expectation of making an organizational tool. I had no, exposure to manufacturing, paper industry, like any of that. So I walked out and told Evan, I said, I think I need to make a planner. And he was like, okay, go for it. And that was the start of just a serendipitous experience of bringing this thing to life.
I love it. I love everything about it because, well, obviously organization's my jam, right? That's what we do here.
Yeah.
But because it gave you accountability. Mm-hmm. You could see the progress every time you checked one of those boxes of like, okay, you could see the progress. And it gave you that freedom that you could also pass the torch by you laying out this framework or you laying mm-hmm. this out. If okay, this is what Rory needs and you need to step away, it doesn't all fall on you. Evan could come in there or somebody else could come in and mm-hmm. do it. So it also is opening up the doors to take it all out of having you carry that mental burden. I mean, obviously yes. You're carrying tons of burdens as a mom yeah. or obligations, but it also invites other people into the conversation. And I love mm-hmm. that. I love it.
Yeah. And it takes it from what do I do with this circumstance to action, yes. And when I would be in those therapy sessions, I would have to, because this was a new practice for our therapists. Like they weren't doing this with their other families outside of our family. They were just writing their case notes, handing them over, and then say, see you in 7 to 10 days. There's no conversation about like implementation. And that was really like the gap. I needed somebody to tell me what to do. Like that was what my brain was screaming after I received her diagnosis. Like somebody tell me what to do. What do I do next? And this really gave me what I did next on a micro level, on a day-to-day level that built to a larger story. So we took those everyday small tasks of implementing therapy, following my planner in terms of where I need to be and when I need to be there, to this larger life story and life experience now that we can do other things because we did those things. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. We're going to take a quick break and then I want to come back and continue on the conversation, talking about some of the other tools, how you're helping other people. I was also reading some like really incredible statistics about disabilities and who your planner's for. And I have a whole bunch of other things. So sit tight. We're going to come back and pick up where we left off. Okay, Amanda. So you start with this planner and as the entrepreneur in me, I'm curious to see how that all, like, how did it go from conception to production?
So this is where when I was saying it was very serendipitous. It just was probably people will probably roll their eyes because I've had other entrepreneurial ventures in the past, and there's, it's always a fight. It's always a hustle. It's always a struggle. But when it came to the glory days, it was just so smooth and free flowing. And I think it was because of the time in my life. Like I was free of putting expectations on anything because Rory blew up my concept of expectation. So I wasn't putting parameters around how this should evolve and look. And so it felt very fluid. So I think our restrictions on stuff is self-imposed is what I learned. And I fight that now that I'm out of that season of my life. I'm back to having expectations of how things will go. But at that period, that year and a half, I wasn't And so it felt magical. The whole process has just felt very
It's got to be
magical.
freeing in a way. It's got to be freeing in some way of like, I'm going
It
to,
was.
yeah,
It was like the word, I hate to say the worst happened because in hindsight, it wasn't the worst. But at the time, I felt like, well, the worst happened. So what else could happen? So let's just go for whatever we're going for. But anyway, the idea came and it was around Christmas time. And we went up to my husband's grandparents' house in Ohio. And I was like, on Instagram because I was nursing at the time. And that's what you do. And I saw that a woman that I respect a lot, her name's Nicole Yang. She's a
okay,
designer. She had previous experience working with Laura Casey from Cultivate What
uh-huh,
Matters.
yeah,
And I knew that I've been following her for years. I knew that she had a very strong background in design of paper products and journals and things of that nature. Well, that morning, she announced her exit from Cultivate What Matters. And she announced that she was creating a consulting business and was looking for clients. And I was like, well, heck, why not? Why not shoot her an email? Like, send the email is what her previous boss had always said. So I sent the email and I told her our story and I told her what we wanted to do. And I said, I'm sure that you have a list of people wanting to work with you, but if you take a no name, here I am. And she was like, oh, I'll do a meeting with you. We'll do a meeting. And so we took a meeting and she was like, I like your concept, but before I take your money and take you on as a client, I think you need to vet your concept a little bit. I don't want to see you waste your money or your time.
sure.
And I was like, that's respectable, So I went out and she gave me a window of time to get that information together. And I did a survey online for special needs parents that I was connected to via our Instagram account. And within 2 minutes, I had like 255 responses. I know that sounds crazy, but it was like 2 to 3 minutes. And I had a ton of participants.
Wow.
And it was resounding. Like, I don't know, 90% said they needed it. And it was a pretty detailed survey, like, price point, where they shop, what they are looking for, that kind of thing. And so I took that information back to her and she was like, this is viable. Let's go for it. And so I sent her over my drawings and she produced them into a 1-month demo of our product. And then I took 55 special needs parents from the US and Canada and got them into a closed Facebook group, mailed them out that 30-day demo product, and they used it. They implemented their days utilizing this initial design. And then in our closed group, they gave us the feedback that they needed. We made the changes and we launched November 18th of 2018. And
Wow.
we sold out. We sold 500 our first run and we sold out. And it was an amazing moment. It makes me want to cry because it's all because of Rory's life. And truly what this book represents to me, because when you open it, it's not just an agenda, it's our story. It's how I went from where I was to where I am. And I try to walk that parent through who received a diagnosis that, that they're going to get to the other side of the heaviness that they might be feeling initially. And then we walk them through how to change their lives from sitting in it to taking action. And that's really special to me because once you've lived this experience, you go through this period of time that you want to champion these women, these mothers. And if you could be at every bedside the day they receive this diagnosis, I would run like the moment my phone would ring. So this book just goes out, it's gone all over the world. So it's been me, showing up to all of these families when they get news they never saw coming, to kind of ring that bell that there's hope, that the good life isn't over, that things are going to be okay. And this is what you do in the unexpected. So like I said, it's been a very serendipitous experience that first year and a half. We are facing challenges now that COVID had happened, like in terms of a planner business operating during COVID
Sure.
has been quite the experience, but we're still chugging along. We're going to launch our 2022 here in a couple months, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
I'm so inspired by your story. And I just, again, all the things, and I always say, whenever you have a business, like it's like anything, it's a marriage, it's work, but when you have to wait, not right. So I'm sure, even though it was serendipitous, I'm sure you've had bumps in the road and like everybody else, but the fact that it was just so organically fluid and those doors opened
Mm-hmm.
is, to me, is like a sign that it was meant to be, for sure.
Yeah,
That
it
this
very
is
much feels that way.
now. I do have more of a tactical question, which is obviously you're a parent with a child who has Down syndrome.
Mhm.
Is the Glory Days broad enough to cover a variety of different special needs? Talk a little bit
Yeah.
about people who are struggling with, autism spectrum or physical disabilities. I mean, I have tons of friends who have kids across all different
Mhm.
spectrums of special needs.
Yeah, so our product is applicable for anyone who's in a caregiver role. So if you are a caregiver of a child, a teen, an elderly parent, somebody who's going through cancer, if you're taking care of them, our products are designed for the caregiver. They're utilized for the caregiver to support the individual that they're caring for. So it's not Down syndrome diagnosis was what entered me into this space, what made me a caregiver and see the need for caregivers to have tools created for them. But it's not specific to Down syndrome. So if you're in therapy of any kind that you need to take action on when you leave that appointment, if you have excess doctor's appointments that are, happening weekly that you need to keep front and center, this product is created for you.
I can't wait to check it out because I have so many friends who are in that space, whether it's kids with autism. I have a friend whose son has spina bifida. I have friends whose kids are undergoing cancer treatment. So like to think about all of the different people that could benefit from this is just got to be incredible. And again, that caregiver role is, I can't even imagine what that is like. And like any job, we need the right tools in place to do our jobs well. And being a caregiver is no different. I mean, that's a job in and of itself. And so to have that is incredible.
Yeah.
And speaking of kind of the spectrum of people that it encompasses, I was wondering if you could just kind of elaborate, share some of the statistics, because I was really surprised, I would say, when I was looking at some of the statistics of kids with special needs, the volume of people that we're talking about. Can you just kind of put some data behind what we're talking about?
Yeah, of course. So about 9.4 million children in America have received a diagnosis that would label them as having a disability. That's 13% of all families raising a child under the age of 18. So that's pretty impactful if you take the time to think about it. Caregiver statistics are even larger than that. You're in the millions again with that because it crosses children to adults. I think that what I have learned from doing that research and seeing these numbers is that we are not a minority in a sense. There are a lot of people living and walking this similar path of taking care of someone else, and receiving diagnosis and functioning in that space of doctor's appointments and therapies. And it really also speaks volumes to the gap in the market that is taking place. You just don't see imagery that represents the diversity and ability, and you don't see images that represent caregiving. You don't see a lot of products made for individuals with disabilities specifically or for caregivers specifically. One example is I just went to New York for 7 days to the New York Now market. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's where product-based businesses go to introduce their products to retailers to start doing wholesale. And there were thousands of vendors on this floor. I mean, we're in the Javits Center.
I was going to say, were you in the Javits Center?
Yeah, we're talking football fields of vendors. And we were the only booth that had any imagery of an individual with a disability in their materials. We were the only booth, the only vendor who was selling a product uniquely made for individuals with a disability or a caregiver. There were only 2 books, like actual books that you would read to children on the floor from thousands that represented an individual visually with a disability or told a story about an individual with a disability. So there's a real gap in this market, and that 9.4 million families are being drastically underserved, and they need served, I would venture to say, the most, because they have the most demanding day-to-day life. So it was really a shocking experience for me. And I didn't notice it until I was at the end of my time there. It was like the day before the last day. I got there early when all the lights were still off, and I walked the whole venue to look around. And it caused me to just stop and pause. And I got pretty emotional that, my daughter's not seen, like, you know what I mean,
Sure.
by retailers or by business owners. And I hope that we can start changing that conversation a little bit and supporting this 9.4 million families.
First of all, that's unbelievable that there's nothing else out there. Hopefully that served you well from a business perspective, being the fact that you didn't have a lot of competition out there. Hopefully hopefully people recognize that and saw the need to have that in there. And again,
I hope so.
I know when there's a lack of conversation, people just often, that leads to so many other ripple effects, of people not knowing what to say or how to act, or
I was just about to say this. Yeah. So
no, go ahead, please.
I don't have any kind of anger or blame or anything like that to other businesses or to retailers, because you know what? For 28 years, I walked around with the same blinders on. I didn't know what to say to myself when Rory was born. So how can I expect the person across from me who's never been in that situation to know what to say? Like, if there's not even a book that's shared in a preschool classroom to introduce a child to somebody who's differently abled in comparison to them, how are they going to grow into adults that know how to handle seeing somebody who's differently abled? Like, so who am I to blame people or be angry with people when they haven't had the exposure? So I think that's something that I just really want to say. Like, the frustration is once you have the conversation. And I would say there was a lot of conversations going on when I was there, and trying to train retailers to see that this population is walking through their stores every day, and that they need these products. So there's a lot of education that has to take place.
So where do you feel like your role is in helping that? And what can we do out there to help facilitate those conversations?
You could facilitate those conversations. And if you have small children, bringing a book into a preschool classroom, or just having a book in your home. There are books out there that moms, like I made a planner. There's moms out there who've written books because they noticed that there weren't any. So Heather Avis has a children's book that just came out, like Different, is great, a great thing to be. So she just came
down. We're going to link up to that in our show notes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Michelle Sullivan from Littlest Warrior, she wrote a book for her son to share in his preschool classrooms. So the things are out there, they're just not mainstreamed. Mm-hmm. And what you can do to advocate for them to be mainstream is to purchase them. So if you know somebody whose child just received an autism diagnosis or any other kind of diagnosis, purchasing our planner is a gift. And then purchasing books to go into your home or into the preschool classroom, trying to advocate for friendships with your children, to be friends with children who might not necessarily have the same ability as them, so that exposure is there. There's a lot of really small things that we can do that can bridge that gap that's in place right now. And those are just a few examples.
And, I come back to this, and again, I don't mean to be on a soapbox, but I think a lot of times we wait till we're in that situation, till we're personally faced with that adversity before we act on it. It's until your kid has a diagnosis of something, or somebody in your family gets diagnosed with, a cancer or something, or before you say, I'm going to do this. And I always say, you don't always have to wait. I do a lot of work in my space, in my world, with pediatric cancer research. It's a big area that's been impacted in my life and in my community. And so that's a cause that I champion a lot. And I remember when I first started doing it, people would come up to me and ask me kind of my testimony of why, how I got involved, and did I lose a kid to cancer? And I'm like, and thankfully the answer is no. Unfortunately, I have friends who have walked through that walk, but I'm like, I shouldn't have to have been I should have had to be in that in order to have that level of empathy, of caring. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to be out there doing walks and fundraisers in this, but just starting that conversation and making this aware to our kids that there are people out there that look different or act different or have different challenges, and that doesn't make them any less. But until we as adults lead by example and start those conversations, I think that's really the first step. So I don't really know where I'm going with that.
Step.
I don't really know where I'm going with that. I just, I'm just listening. Like, again, I don't want somebody to have to so people, what I'm saying is go out and buy these books, buy a planner, support it, even just to look at it, to humble yourself and go, thank you, Jesus, that I don't have to do all of these things, that I don't have to have all of these caregiver roles, and really just, bring somebody a meal, do something.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah. I think when you realize, cause there is that piece, like, I know it's hard sometimes to absorb that sympathy, or that, I don't want to use the word pity, because it might not be pity, but thank God that's not me. It's not you, because you were given the helper role. I was given the role to be the helper to Rory. And if you don't have something like that going in your life, you were given the role to be the helper to the person like me. And I'd say that that's what I've seen evolve in my friendships. When I had to come and tell my friends about this unexpected diagnosis, they didn't know what to do with me for quite some time. Some were quicker to know how to handle it. Some took years to know how to handle it. But I would say what I've seen them all do is they show up in my gap when they can see that, I wasn't emotionally handling it well. They came into that gap and they supported me if that was where they were stronger. Does that make sense? Totally. And now that I'm not necessarily in that emotional space as much as I was, now it's a logistic and an overwhelmed in terms of obligation. Here's a perfect example. I have a friend. We navigated a distance after Rory was born because she was pregnant at the same time. It was a scary thing to observe in your close friend. And she had to go through a process, but now that she's through that process and we've, come back from that, things that she'll do, for instance, is if she's scheduling something for her daughter who's the same age as me, that she knows I might be a little nervous to walk into that space because of Rory's disability and what that might bring to the participation of that activity, she will make the appointment when she makes the appointment for her daughter. So like, she signed her daughter up for dance. When she called for her daughter, she said, I have a friend, this is her daughter, can she do dance? She had that conversation for me so that I didn't have to, and then called and said, we have dance on Thursday at 5:30 if you can make it. She'll be in my daughter's class. So it doesn't always mean like putting a flag out or wearing a shirt or walking in a awareness walk or raising money. It's not always those big grand things. Sometimes it's just showing up in that gap. It's just taking the burden of the conversation off of the other person, taking the burden of trying to find the product that they need off of them and finding it for them, being the parent that brings the book to the preschool classroom instead of leaving that to the parent who's living it. Those are the small ways.
I love it. Because those are practical things. And again, we all have gifts. We all know what we're good at. And I think one of the things, and again, I can relate this back to my cancer mom friends, is instead of asking and putting the burden back on you of what can I do, just problem solve yourself. Think about things that you can do to help somebody out, whether it's like you said, signing Rory up for something, or taking Owen to the park so that you can have time, or whatever it is. And then wait, we didn't even talk about this, but you can have another kid in the mix. Because I'm reading her bio. We're talking about these 2 kids, and her bio says 3 kids. So then you decided, crazy woman, to go and do this again.
Yes. Yeah. So we had a 3rd child. He's 2. His name's Wyatt. He is the perfect bookend. He is wild and feisty and just hangs with them so well. And he's Rory's best friend. Like, we call them the twins. They give me a run for my money because they are developmentally like twins. Even though she's 4, she leans more towards 2 than 4. And so it's a wild time here in the Cunningham home. Like, they're in the refrigerator, they're running outside. They're just always into something.
I love it. I love it. It's amazing. I could talk to you all day about this, but I know that we're kind of coming to a full circle close here. Before we take our last break, I want you to just tell our listeners where they can go to buy your product, support you, all of the things.
Well, you can visit us at our website, theglorydaysco.com. It's theglorydaysco.com. And we'll be launching our 2022 Glory Days Daily Planner here in a couple months. You'll be on our social media. You'll hear all about it. Sign up for our newsletter so you can hear about it. We also have a therapy tracking journal, medication tracking journal, caregiver gratitude journal, sticky pads, all kinds of things to help you feel equipped in the role you've been called to.
Love it. I love it. I can't wait. And of course, as always, we'll have links to all of that in our show notes. We're going to take one more quick break. And then before we leave, we are going to put you in the hot seat for our wrap-up questions. So sit tight.
Perfect.
All right, Amanda. So we are back. And I loved everything about our conversation. I can't even tell you. So you've been such an inspiration to me, to our listeners. We always ask our guests a few questions before we leave them. First of all, what book has inspired you in your life? It could be personal, it could be professional, anything that you could do to kind of pass the baton to somebody else. So that might be, in a place that's struggling.
What book? Am I saying Brené Brown? Am I saying that properly?
Brené Brown?
Brené
Yep.
Brown, yeah.
Okay.
Rising Strong.
Mm-hmm.
I read that before I had Rory, and it was equipping me for what I was about to rise out of. So that one is something that I always have hold on to. And then forgive me, I don't know the author, but it's called The Blessing.
Okay.
My best friend's mother gave that to me before I had Owen. And it was about the words we speak over our children. So that one has been really impactful too.
I love it. That's awesome. And then the last two questions that we ask every guest is, in this particular season of your life, where do you feel that you are the most organized, and where do you feel like you're a bit of a hot mess?
Oh, goodness. Dinner time, hot mess mom here. When I've been home cooking meals and snacks all day, by the time dinner rolls around, I kind of throw the towel in, which is to my detriment. What do I feel like I'm on top of? If you ask me this tomorrow, it might change, but right now I feel like I'm really on top of their schedules. It's like kind of like a fresh start with us all going back to our schooling and things like that. So I feel really on top of our schedule this month. That might change next month.
And that's the beauty. And I'm glad that you said that, because everything is whatever season we're in, whatever, it's going to change. And that's just how life is. But I love it, because as long as we've got something that we're feeling good at, when we have those hot mess moments, we can always look back and say, but I'm thriving here. And that's what I always
most definitely.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much for coming on, your candor, for sharing your story. It's so inspiring. Please give all of your kids, but especially Rory, give her a big hug from all of us. And thank you for turning your story into something that is actionable and helping thousands of people out there. So we appreciate
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And if this is your first time tuning in, welcome to this Organized Life podcast. Make sure that you click the subscribe or follow button wherever you listen to podcasts, so new episodes will get downloaded each and every week. We're also on social media. You can follow us at Simply Be Organized anywhere, or join our Facebook group called This Organized Life Podcast. And you can post questions, comments. If you have somebody that you think would make for a good guest, we would love to hear from you. So reach out. Until next week, I'm Lori Plow. Peace out.